everybody. Thanks for joining the CFD regulatory session. I just want to take a quick poll because we have a small group, so we can have more of a customized discussion rather than a canned discussion. So how many of you are in the drug and biotech area? Okay, and how many are in the device? Okay, how about, oh boy, you're multiple talents. How many in the diagnostic? Okay, there are few, two diagnostic. Okay, it looks like device and drug are the predominant interest here. Are you all interested in funding, or are you more interested in trying to understand how to enter China? Can I have a, so who is interested in funding from China? Okay, so how many are interested in learning how to access China, how to get the regulatory approval and reimbursement situation? Okay, so it's very broad. Looks like we have a very broad background and very broad topic. So not easy to cover it all in 40 minutes. So what I thought is we'll start off with a brief introduction about our background, and then I'll talk a little bit, just give you a high-level overview of the CFDA changes in the device and drug area. And then we can have our investors to talk a little bit about their experience and the importance of regulatory or not. And then we open up for discussion. So I'll start off an introduction about myself. I'm Grace Fu Palma. I grew up in Beijing originally. Have been traveling back and forth between US and China, worked in the large multinational companies, small startups, and founded China Med Device 7 years ago. We have an office in the US in Boston, as well as an office in Beijing with over 20 people. So we're a consulting company. We specialize in getting CFDA regulatory approval, as well as the RA/CRO side, and then also we help companies, the Western companies, get their understanding of the China market in terms of reimbursement as well as partnership and market assessment. Next is James.
James Lee. Unison Ventures is a venture fund, and it belongs to a bigger financial group called EJM Holdings, and I'm based in China. So we are a financial investor. We've done deals from early stage to late stage, but more recent years, our appetite is more in the earlier stage companies, and I say we look more into the device space than pharma. We used to look at pharma also, but pharma now sort of is more late stage for us. But we looked at a device both in Boston area, Munich area, and some European areas. I said I don't know everything, but the big areas we have looked at cardiovascular and diabetes and select areas. So we have a team that cover the space.
Okay, I'm Yan. I'm from Cohen Capital. Cohen Capital was one of the first VCP firms in China. We were established in year 2000. Over the past 17 years, we have invested over 80 healthcare companies with more than 30 going IPO or being acquired. Our company portfolio include BGI, one of the big players in the genomics industry, also the Innovent Farm, one of the rising star right now in China, and will go IPO soon in Hong Kong. Beta Pharmaceutical, and Korean Pharmaceutical, which just went IPO last week in China, so and so on. Currently, we manage over $2.5 billion US. We have we just closed a new fund about the US dollar fund, and most of them will be investing in United States. I will be personally responsible for the healthcare VC investments in the United States and Europe.
Thank you for the introduction. So I'll talk a little bit to give you a perspective of the drug and medical device landscape in China. In the US, for device companies to get funding is very challenging because most of the US, especially the early stage companies, are getting into the biotech area. So, but device is very hot in China. A lot of Chinese companies are looking for US medical technology. China has a lot of money because 40% of the luxury goods on the world is actually bought by the Chinese people. So, so there's tons of money, and they don't have the domestically developed technology, so they are looking for the U.S. for medical device. The reason for medical device is because it's hotter. It's because it's to them it's a shorter time to market, and the drug, take 5 to 6 years, and device, you get 510K 6 months, and then China, it's a couple of years. Especially if you have a device, it's easy to transfer to China. So there's a lot of interest in the device. Reimbursement system, so there are many reasons. So device is hot on the investment side. And then also, if you look at the number of manufacturers in China, how many manufacturers? There are about 15,000 device manufacturers registered with Cfda. And these 15,000, most of them are very small. And the big ones, over $100 million, that's considered huge. It's almost like Medtronic equivalency of China. I'm talking about domestic China device manufacturer. All the multinational, of course, is in a different space. They're all in China. If you look at all the big multinational device or diagnostic or drug, they're all in China. But I'm talking about domestic, because these domestic companies is, if you're looking for funding or partnership, they're more eager to invest with you. They also can help you in terms of have special status when it comes to the commercialization process, because the Chinese government is encouraging domestic-made product, and China is still a public hospital-driven environment. So they can mandate certain amount of public spending has to come from domestic-made product. So on the device side, there are so many manufacturers who want to upgrade themselves, looking for partners, and also there's so much money in this space. And if you look at the drug side, there are about 5,000 manufacturers, and it's close. Probably you guys can comment on how many are more of a larger size. So either one of these, if you look at the regulatory landscape, right? For you guys, you want to go to China. CFDA, we follow CFDA. We've been doing this for over 15 years. So when I started first dealing with CFDA, just a small pile of paper, I get my product approved. But now it's probably this thick. And also the testing is very minimum. Like EMC, if you understand electronic device, EMC, IEC, these are the basic requirements. EMC was not required before. Now it's required in China. I think it started in just 3 years ago, January 1st, 2015. Before it wasn't required. So EMC is very challenging now. So the type testing and the whole transformation of CFDA started with new Chinese President Xi. When he came into power, he wants to raise the standards and the innovation speed of both drug and device in China. So President Li, who actually graduated a few years ahead of me, same university, they all want China to not just an emerging market. They want to innovate, and they want to make sure all the manufacturers in China start to have the same quality standard as the Western world. So with that said, the whole CFDA requirements, the basic policy and regulation was totally kind of uplifted with 650 degree. That's over several years ago. So with that, 4 years ago, And these 4 years, every year, just on the device, not just the drug side, device side, you can expect at least 150 minimum type of regulation guidelines change from the CFDA. And in terms of personnel changes, if you look at the drug, 3 years ago, the drug reviewers, they were about less than 100. And that number has 6 times increased. So, and then on the device side, if you look at the number of reviewers, this is the reviewers. I'm not talking about the other departments. And if you look at the device side reviewers, there used to be less than 100. Now they're close to 300 on the device side. So with that kind of magnitude of personnel changes, that means the government really wants to increase the speed as well as the quality. So when you want to go to China to register, and you need to understand who you're dealing with. Because they're new, I used to make the analogy of China CFDA is like a teenager. They're very dynamic, they're eager, but they're not as matured. And FDA in the US, I compare them like a grandparents. So they're slow, they're matured. They know what they do and they understand the mentality. So you're dealing with a teenager versus grandparents, 2 very different systems. So you need to understand what you're getting into. So because we've been seeing both systems for so many years, and we have an online log that you can log into our website to track. We publish a weekly log, what's new from CFDA. So that's one of the things I want to comment is the difference of the system. And then in terms of the things you should look at when you enter into China is you should have, whether you're on the device or on the drug side, we typically provide a strategy. On the device side, we let you know what's your classification. Is it clinical exam? These are the critical questions to ask. Because an FDA classification 510K, in the FDA database, you have at least 60% is 510K. About 5% is the PMA. In China, no. China class 3 equivalent to PMA is over 30% are in the PMA bucket. I'm talking about device and IVD side. And then the 510K side is class 2. That's now the close to, I think is close to about 40-50%. And then there's class 1 in China, the 3 classifications. They don't equal each other. So don't make that mistake. And then the requirements could be different too with the standardization. The same thing with drugs. So if you have a new drug, you go to China, you did all your US stuff, but you still have to repeat a lot of the stuff in China. However, the change, as I said, China wants to improve its quality, wants to improve the time of innovation. So China joined ICH. I don't know if you guys are familiar with the regulatory bodies. ICH is a big impact. China joined ICH because means they're going to accept more international data. So on the drug side, and one of the critical change that happened this year is a year ago on the drug side, device happened this year. So on the drug side, a year ago, if you have a device that you want to introduce in the FDA, right, and you have the clinical trial in phase 1, you can, with conditions, if your device is innovative enough, significant enough, you can parallel with China. This was never possible with CFDA, but a year ago it's possible. And there's special approval process for that. So you can essentially, with the right product and the right agency to help you, I emphasize the right agency, to help you to understand that pathway, you can have 2 major countries to launch the same drug on the 2 global markets. So that's very significant change from the CFDA point of view. So on the device side, there are special requirements too. So I will stop talking. And then the other thing I want to make comment is 70% of the population is in Asia. So think about Asia, 70% of the population, and they are very, very underserved. And China, if you think about the wealth from China, China is 5 times the US population. So 20% of the population in China, that's equivalent to almost like 3/4 of the US population that considered middle class have expendable spending. So it's like 3/4 of the US population that can pay out of their pocket to do your cancer screening, to do whatever diagnostic. Sometimes it's out of pocket, it's unproven, but you have data to prove it. So China has a huge private pay patient population for certain type of tests. So if you look at that number and compare, again with what you're looking for, it's very different. So now I'm going to open the comments about questions to our panel on some of the regulatory perspective, on their perspective on the changes with the CFDA. What's in your portfolio companies that you invested in? What's your experience?
I feel that Grace, being American, she's already nice, friendly to the Chinese government. We feel it's still very bureaucratic, and things are improving, and also there's desire to make it better, make it shorter. But as where we are right now is that there is a desire and commitment to make the approval more efficient. At the same time, a number of factors that do constrain the current approval speed. One is the general experience of the CFDA, certainly compared to the US, they are short and very great. I can say that grandchildren, but the reality is that the lack of experience. But second is actually the shortage in heads. The size of American FDA, you say 10,000 people. In China, probably you're talking about 1 or 2% of that size. They're growing, but still a wide gap. So I think the shortage in resources and experience. And the third thing is part of the cultural background is there has been the anti-corruption campaign going on in China. I would say it's not people perceive China to be corrupt. I would say I see much less of corruption, but rather that people for fear of being perceived as for wrongdoing actually don't want to do things. So there's we just feel that the efficiency is an issue, which but our firm is not really in the business of let's say we're not an expert in securing approval. So this probably calls all the more calls for expert and professionals to be involved and to assist in the professional process so that the innovation can be capitalized efficiently. So I say I say the trend is good, the trend is positive, but there is still a gap, and things we like to see things happen quicker, and then also we appreciate like to work with partners to make the whole process more efficient.
Yeah, I totally agree with what James said. Things are improving. They are learning about how to evaluate the drug, especially the FDA has a lot of experience. They are learning from that. One of our portfolio is which is a CAR-T player in China. So probably already know that CAR-T is very hot in China right now. There are more than 10 or 20 CAR-T companies, and there are a list of them that is submitting the IND, and I think 3 or 4 already got IND approved. So it's very hot in China right now, and the company did a lot talking with the CFDA staffs, and it's the lesson they definitely need to learn from FDA, and the same the lesson from the FDA is that the company need to talk with the regulatory policy as soon as possible, even before you plan to submit the IND.
Thank you. So the other, since a lot of you are also looking for funding, so I'm interested in you guys' perspective because you guys have funds. So you funds, you evaluate company, so that's the classic investment vehicle. And we talked about regulatory could take some time and money. There are also other alternative investments. I'm interested in your perspectives about these alternative investments for company, you know, like the U.S. smaller early stage companies. Like China has a lot of science parks that the government they provide you with special incentives to come to settle down there, and they help you with some fund you with regulatory approval, and they partner you with local companies. So the science parks is one option, and also, as I said, there's so many companies. Some are decent size, have the money to invest. The corporate companies, like my sister's a company that does an investment platform, so we help them structure a corporate type of thing in China as well. So the other forms of investment, could you comment on those? What's your from China for companies like the audience seeking funding for early stage?
Well, early stage, I mean, early stage very much is a personal relationship and passion, really, because what Grace was mentioning, there are government-funded programs, but each have its own, motivations and incentives. I think it's difficult for early stage company to really burn the hours to secure those funds. I mean, basically you need to call it. I tell you what they can provide to you. They can provide to you free space. Okay, do you really need that space? If you're big, you need the space. If you're small, you can work out of your house. Do you need that space? Second, they're going to give you a tax break. Now, if you don't earn any money, do you care about a tax break? You got nothing to break on in the first place. Right? And the third is that sure, they give you money, but usually they match the money. So that's it. They're going to match. Let's say if you have $2 million, they can match $2 million. But where does your $2 million come from? So if you don't get that, you won't get the matching money either. So these are programs probably more suited for companies that are already established. Then you already have funding, you already have something. And then if you have space, then yeah, so at that time the space is useful. So I think these are constructive, but probably later stage companies will benefit more. But as a rule of thumb, anything any government anywhere in the world touches, usually they go to hell. Either in England, in America, in China, if anything that's government funded, they go to hell. Anything that is private, usually they go up. So have you ever heard about one great Chinese or whatever government-owned company that being innovative? I don't think so. So I personally don't trust the Chinese government-funded programs. But feel free. As I said, if you are, I mean, you are whoever you are where you are. I mean, from a funding perspective, you are. If you're good enough, the investor's going to chase you, bag you, knock on your door, kneel down in front of you to give you money. But if you're desperate, then whoever that gives you money, you take it. So it depends on where you stand, right? If you have no choice, then somebody was gonna give you whatever. You take what you can, because a lot of good companies just in the early stage, that's what you have to face, right? So I mean, so coming back to the point is that if these alternative platforms started by the government, I personally am not that high on them, because I don't think a free chair, a room that's for free, or a stipend of $100,000 for me to buy a house in their community. These are fine, good stuff, but not really something that can create the business. You might as well just go straight to whoever. Now again, you come back to early stages that. Your thing, always have a, nice idea. Any doctor, especially surgeons, when they operate on something, they're gonna come up with some ideas, because usually they're not happy with, the devices, the instrument they use. They always have something, cooked up, and then they're gonna come up with something. And this thing, then, for devices, if other doctors want to use it, and market, nobody wants to use it, and something very nice, but it doesn't just commercialize. But there are always some people, some audience who are, who can get excited about, your innovation, because the passion, people's minds are different. So if you're early and you have something interesting, so reach out to people and see, where you can create the passion, and whoever that has the passion, then they probably gonna back you. So I say just go out and try to seek out people who can resonate with you. but do it anywhere in the world professionally, and also with with your heart in it. Because people could see that if if you're really into something yourself personally, or you are just brokering something that you have a small stake in. Because we have seen, for example, there's some Walking Dead company on NASDAQ. I've seen a few. Don't worry about their background. I've seen enough of the MIT professors founded company after 20 years trading at $15 million on NASDAQ. You heard about the MIT? Wow, MIT robotics. MIT and robotics, automation, AI, big data. After all that, the market says you're great MIT, you're worth $15 million, you better just be delisted. So I've seen those things. If you come up with that kind of thing, we've seen those, and people say, yeah, MIT is wonderful, but not you, hey, it's just not you. And then we have seen all the other stuffs that are very interesting. So the whole point is that if you're early, then just go out and then find out people who resonate with you. I'm sure somehow, somewhere, somebody's gonna, recognize you. But to the extent that you are yourself, a believer in what you seek or what you're doing.
So I just want to add, in the past few years, there's a trend that Chinese VCs are coming to the United States and looking for the innovative technologies and bring back to the China. It's called the China angle. As many of the VCs done that, and the lesson from that is please find a real reliable player, partner in China, and it will help you guys to more smoothly explore the Chinese market. Because definitely the Chinese market is big, but I mean there are a lot of changes in the regulatory policy, and also as James mentioned, the government, some government may be reliable, but the others may not. But like Shenzhen, they have a lot of support resources to the biomedical companies, because Shenzhen there's no really good healthcare companies, and that's why they put a lot of resources to it to kind of boost the industry, the healthcare industry. And so just find a reliable partner in China, like James and me, and we can talk later.
Reliable.
Yeah, they're reliable. You guys have been in the industry for so long. Plus, he lives in Boston locally. You can track him down if he defects, right? Thank you for the answer. I just want to add one comment to the science park. I wouldn't encourage you to go there by yourselves to join the science park. That would be a suicide. So what I encourage you to do is to find a Chinese partner. Collectively, the two of you would both benefit. So with the Chinese partner and your technology, the deal we structured before in the partnership is the Chinese company pay you certain licensing fee, and you transfer some rights. For China, you can always have a carve out of if you later on you want to sell and you're concerned about being exclusive China given to somebody, you can always have a buyout clause. But in that case, then both of you can double your investment. The Chinese company can deal with the local science park and can enjoy the benefits. Meanwhile, you have somebody who speak the English language. There are companies who can help you do this. So that's the way you leverage the science park. So,
Grace, what does an upfront payment look like from a Chinese perspective?
depending on what your device is. We just helped one company last year. They even don't have a prototype. It's an imaging for prostate. It's a little imaging device to screen prostate cancer. The corporate Chinese company invested $4 million with them. And then in the science park, you can, depending really who your investor is, if it's a smaller one, you would have less from the company. We also helped with very small, got them like 500,000. Especially if you have a lead investor already from the US, and you need additional money, those are more attractive than having the Chinese company as your lead investor. Usually the Chinese company want to have smaller risk. So if you have a lead investor, you need additional millions here and there. And then if you want, 5 million, 10 million in that bucket, you talk to a different group of people. So depending on what you're looking for. So without much time left, so I open the questions to the floor.
I have a question. It was my impression that for medical device CFDA approval, it was really necessary to have clinical data and clinical evidence generated in China with the Chinese partner. Is that true, or is it a requirement, or is it just a recommendation that helps the process?
Depending on the classification of your device. So it's the clinical, there's a CER, and then there's the clinical trial. So if your device is class 2, there's one amendment to, earlier I said about the 650 degree, and there's an amendment to the 650 that was released last month. In that amendment, it's structural feedback. So class 2, I'm talking about device and IVD, clinical trial is not required as a rule of thumb. Class 3, unless you can prove otherwise through CER. What a CER is a clinical evidence that you have an equivalent product that has been released in China, not just other countries. So it has been CFD approved. And you can show that you're equivalent with clinical evidence, either through reference, there's specific clinical database that CFD requires, you write a CR report, there's specific guidelines for that, and then you do not need clinical trial if your CER is approved. If not, of class 3, you would need clinical trial. When you do the clinical trial, there's another regulation that was just passed this year too, is acceptance of international clinical data. If you have clinical trial data already from Europe or US, just like the Chinese ethnic background data, you can do a subset. Again, you can use other clinical evidence to reduce the sample required. So in that case, how many is all negotiable with the reviewer, because certain, like SpO2, that's skin sensitive. So you need yellow skin, white skin, the reading is different. So you do need clinical data from China, but certain devices, race makes no difference. And then you can argue, hey, I really don't need it, here's the proof. So all those are negotiable.
But even if it's not required, will it increase your chances of getting approval?
No, that Chinese, as you guys said, is government, they go by guideline.
Okay.
So certainly in the U.S., we often have personal interviews and bring in your CRO or whatever to present to the FDA. Is the same thing done in China?
No, the China. You have to be very careful with the type of CRO you use. There are a lot of drug CRO who really don't understand device and IVD. The CRO, the clinical GCP requirements required by CFDA is very specific. It's the same reviewer that reviews your technical file, also review your clinical file. It's the same person. And now they changed with 3 reviewers, the key reviewer with 2 supplement reviewers. So when they look at it, they look at purely from the regulatory point of view. So you got to make sure your CRO company understands the CFDA requirement. If it's just a traditional CRO, what they do, the data collection process, the monitoring process, the EC approval process, and the analysis, if they do not meet the CFDA guideline, your CRO is useless. So you got to make sure you have the regulatory quality control there. And we provide both RA and CRO. So if you want a second opinion, or if you have a company already, we can certainly help you with that.
I have 2 separate questions. One is more geared towards the regulatory, and one is more geared towards investors. So you talk about having a partner in China and then go there and expand the market. When we go there to talk with them, everybody says, every kind of like potential distributor or potential strategic alliance partners, they say they have strong government relationship. Everybody
That's
says
true, that's true.
If everybody says they do,
So you have to
then-
vest.
then there's no one. So what would be the best practices to really, like when we are based in Boston and have no really, like domain knowledge locally, how can we identify those strong relationship? And then towards to the investors, just can you share a little bit color or your comment on recent Hong Kong IPO change, and then how does that affect your investment themes?
So on the distribution side in China, drug is a different world. On the device side, there are over 200,000 registered device distributors. It's a very fragmented market, and then the government is trying to change that dynamics. So, I mean, it's true, everybody you talk to, they all tell you they have government relationship, and they can cover the whole country. Which is not true what they said a lot of times. So, and that's why you need companies like us to help you to research. We will tell you, we don't know all the players either. In certain segments, we know more of the bigger players, but at least we know how to evaluate them. So in China, there are a few key provinces, and those you want to have those provincial strong dealers. There's no one national dealer that can help you cover the whole country. I don't believe that. Usually what we recommend, depending on your funding, if you have direct sales force that you can place out throughout the country, that's a big company thing. You don't have it as a small company. So what we typically provide on the commercial service side is we help qualify. Usually we recommend to have 2 or 3 big dealers. And then we recommend, we usually help set up a dedicated personnel for you in China. So this personnel, because for you to set up a company, paying the employees a pain in the neck for tax, for all sort of implications. So we kind of your shadow company there. So we have a dedicated person to help you. In the strategic accounts, you want to have a couple of strategic accounts under your management for the reference. And then you work with these couple of key dealers to help you blanket other areas. So there's ways, economic ways of doing that entry. I agree. I don't think you can. You even don't know how to start to qualify these if you have never been to China on the commercial side.
The interesting thing that Grace brought up, but again, it depends on your resources. If you have resources, you can set up your own, your team. But if you're small, you think about, setting up your own team, and you get like 2 employees or 3 people, and one of them quits, then you're finished. So in that regard, you really do have to have some skin, on the ground. So when people say they know people, first of all, it is true. Second is knowing somebody, doesn't necessarily lead to business, but doesn't necessarily lead to no business either. I think you will need to have people, basically people on the ground who have skin in the game. So I think first thing is somebody you can trust, that you figure out yourself. You can trust somebody or not. And then second is that that person, doesn't only earn, cash out of the relationship, but also invest in it. I think if you have vested interest, aligned interest plus a trustworthy relationship, then the third thing, which actually quite important, is rely on a professional rather than somebody who claims he's a relationship. Because if you think about how in a country of 1 billion people, that broad. I mean, if you think about it, you ask, do you have a relationship in Ohio? If you do, then do you have a relationship in Detroit or in Florida? Right? You don't. So China is that big, so sure, people all have relationships, but if you're a professional and then you have your own aligned interest and you're hardworking and you're not dumb and you're honest, somehow if you work for 5 years, something will happen. So just along that way, it's not all that strange. But you do have to have somebody who's local and work hard and effective. If they're not effective, then just sending your own people probably won't happen if you don't have the resources. Because what we see is either small companies who have a strong local partner with mining interests or very big company that can blow a lot of money. So mid-sized company in between, they can pay a lot to hire, and then also they don't have enough skin locally. Then these tend to be the company that struggle a lot. So I mean that is pretty common sense. I don't think that needs to be discussed in the context of any country, probably same anywhere. In terms of investing, especially early stage companies, I would say I care less about the structure and also the jurisdiction, because if you're a good company, somehow we can figure out a structure somewhere to monetize. So China's domestic capital markets, even after rounds of correction, still is very rich. Still, you're talking about superbly high multiples, double the U.S. multiples, where Hong Kong, of course, it's a hard currency. Hong Kong dollar is equivalent to U.S. dollars, so you can get your money out easier. So it depends on people's preference. If you just only look at a sort of public markets multiple, then mainland China, just structurally, it has to be higher because it is an approval process, not a merit-based process. So you get approved, you get listed, and once you're listed, you're protected because not everybody can rush to the market, so you've got to have a higher multiple. But then the approval itself, the queuing process all takes a long time. But again, I think if you're a good company, then when the time comes for liquidity event, you can always figure out which way you want to go, or you can even do a dual listing. So I'm less concerned about really where the company domiciled, and it's these sort of commercial aspects. They can always be restructured, reorganized into something that fits.
Yeah, first of all, the Hong Kong market does not show very good movement for the first two biotech companies since the new policy, but I mean this is definitely it's a reasonable. This is definitely the reasonable valuation because it's high. It's before the revenue, the pre-revenue companies. In comparison to the Chinese stock market, they usually needed to have more than 500 million for revenue and before going to IPO, and that's kind of the changes in the investment strategy or philosophy, because in the past when you go IPO in China, you kind of secure an exit and also a higher potential price potential for the VC and PE firms, and that's a good sign. But I mean, it's kind of it has a lot of changes here right now. As in the China stock market, they also seems the policy that encourage the pre-revenue companies, biotech companies, to go IPO in the China market right now. We will see how the price goes.
Well, thank you, James and Yan and everybody. Looks like our time is up. And if you have further questions, please feel free. We'll hang around.